I thought the curriculum was trash and that the curriculum developers who were typically didn't look anything like the students that I taught had no idea what they were doing, right?
Welcome back to Teacher Tales, where we give you the keys to overcoming teacher burnout to find work-life balance and educational bliss, if it still exists. I'm your host, Tony Rambles, and on this interview episode of Teacher Tales, we give you the practical steps to revamp your curriculum for maximum student engagement and success. And we help you discover the secrets to balancing the workload and preventing teacher burnout. Without further ado, here we go. So, Nadine,
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
O, excuse me, Dr. O, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
How are
Thank you. So glad to be here. So glad to be back. Thank you for inviting me back.
So when I thought about talking about curriculum, there is no other person that I thought about bringing on the show.
That's
so
right.
first, for the people who haven't seen you on the previous episode, just give us a little short background of your expertise and how you got into really turning curriculum into something new and exciting.
Absolutely. So first of all, you have me blushing over here. I'm like, seriously? You could only have thought of myself for this. I appreciate that. And now a little bit on my background. So I came into teaching after having my son and realizing that there was no just right school for my little Black boy, and how many other families must struggle with that same challenge, finding a just right school for their child. And so while I couldn't find the just right school for my child, and we went through some trials and tribulations, I also decided to become a part of the solution. And I became a classroom teacher. And I chose mathematics because I thought it would be marketable, right? You know, people got to check off their boxes. And I am a Black woman, right? In the field of
Yes, ma'am.
mathematics. So I thought that I would be highly employable. And I was, and it worked out. And so I taught middle grades mathematics for about 15, maybe 17 years. I don't really remember the numbers. And then there's an overlap where I became a team leader at the grade level, and then an instructional coach for the math department, and then an instructional transformation coach for grades, school that was grades 6 through 12. And now I am working independently as an entrepreneur, an educational entrepreneur, transforming classroom instruction wherever people invite me to support.
Wow. And you have been invited here. And hopefully you get some more invites to do some transformation.
Yes,
So we'll
yes.
start out with what is so different about what you do than what you've seen throughout classrooms as your time observing and coaching, as well as in your time of teaching.
Okay, so I'll start with my time of teaching because it was through teaching that I recognized that I had something different, unique, and that I could share with others. And that's why I became an instructional coach. So in my classroom, what I had learned is that I was doing too much work, right? So I would prepare these amazing lessons, and then I would go in and I would perform the lesson, right? So I was that teacher that would ask a question and answer the question at the same time. I was that teacher that was exhausted at the end of the day because I'm doing all the work. And my kids are like, they bouncing out the door ready for the next thing. And so I don't exactly remember when I switched the flip or flipped the switch. I don't know how well that goes. But I do remember being like, enough is enough, right? And I started with projects. And when I saw how engaged my students were with giving them projects to apply the math that we were learning, it just dawned on me that I was doing way too much work. And I transformed from being a classroom teacher to a facilitator of classroom learning experiences. And so that's what I coach into when I work with classroom teachers, whether one-on-one or on a team level, or for the professional development workshops that I host. It's all about transforming that mindset from being the sage on the stage to being a facilitator of classroom learning experiences. And I think the thing that I focus a lot on is how do we get the students to be more engaged? How do we get students to do more of the heavy lifting? And that's what I learned through planning projects for my students to apply the math that they were learning. Like, what are some of the moves I need to make so that students are doing the research that they're asking me the questions, right? Versus me thinking that I could pour into them all that they needed to learn. I needed them to become the seekers of knowledge. And that has been something that profoundly impacted the teaching and learning experience in my classroom. And it's definitely something that I'm getting feedback from classroom teachers that I'm working with. And they're like, whoa, like this really works.
I wanted them to become the seekers of knowledge. Wow,
That's right.
that's
right.
hot. I like that. What is the difference between a facilitator and the sage on the stage, as you said?
Yeah. The facilitator is, I want to say it's like almost like a conductor, right? Like you're orchestrating, you're making sure all the pieces are in place for this learning experience to take place. So you do have to do work, right? There is, like how you said, in a few weeks, a lot of teachers are going to start getting back into the mode of planning and preparing for the upcoming school year. You do have to do your work and your research for whatever unit and lesson that you're going to teach, so that when you're in the classroom and you present a quick mini lesson on what it is students are expected to learn and understand by the end of the class, you can now be flexible and field questions as they come at you, right? You can kind of guide students on that learning journey versus you being at the front of the classroom saying, and here's how you do it, and here's how you should think about it. And now I want you to try it. You want to give your students just enough information that they start trying it, but then they have questions, right? You want to have them in that zone of proximal development. You want to have them in that, what is it called? The struggle zone. It's that just right struggle, not too hard and definitely not too easy. So they have to ask questions. They have to stop and think, use their notes, phone a friend, and maybe ask you a question to which you really are just going to go over and say, that's a great question. What are your resources, right? Because when they're asking you the question, more times, than not, they have the answers because that's what you have done in your mini lesson and in those previous lessons. You've already given them the information they need to be successful.
You want them in a zone where they are struggling enough to want to find the answer. So like they feel like they're close, but they need maybe some reassurance.
That's
but they're not struggling so much to where they feel like I can't do this and I'm tapped out. I'm out. I'm done.
And I'm out. Yeah, you don't want the tap out.
Yes.
Don't want that.
Oftentimes, whenever I'm putting these projects together, and I think we plan stuff in the same vein, because when the kids ask me these questions, I ask them the question that in turn helps them to go and find the answer themselves instead of me just giving them the answers. I'm like, okay, well, what do you think? Because of what I teach, and I'm just grateful that I kind of fell into this spot. That's a whole different story. But because I teach communications, and a lot of what we do is kind of creatively open-ended, I don't want to just tell them exactly what to do and how to think about stuff. I'll say, okay, here's the end result. This is what I want you to be able to present. And how you get there is up to you. I said, okay, these are the rules. However, I give this caveat because I think this is true in real life. I said, these are the rules, but if you break the rules, you better be really good. And if it's exceptional, then you may be able to get away with it. So even though you have these rules, like I still want you to think outside of that. And if you have a question, then bring that to me and I may go, yeah, I don't care what I just told you, do that because I really like that idea. That really works. So let's allow them like that autonomy to be able to create. So
Amen.
I teach communications and public speaking. So there's tons of stuff that you could do with that. You did this in the math class. So kind of break that down, because when I think of math, I don't first think of creativity. I think of very formulaic, very structured. There's no room for error. So how did you do that?
Okay. So first and foremost, when it comes to math, yes, the same way you present to your students, here's the end result, right? That's what I would say to my students. Like, here's the answer. But you might come at it at a completely different way than I've come at it, right? Or the person sitting next to you has. So giving them that freedom, and really it's empowering them to understand, like, we're going to all get to the same result, but you might have a different path, and that's okay. But then when it comes to the projects, it's always through application. It's practical application. Every student wants to know, every person wants to know, even if you're an adult and you're in a professional development meeting, you want to know, how am I using this back in my classroom? Well, our students want to know the same thing. How am I using this in my everyday life? Why is this important? And so the projects, I taught middle grades math, and I'll just use ratios and proportions as the unit for the example. But when he was talking about ratios and proportions, he was talking about recipes, right? So there were projects on cooking things that had to scale up a recipe or scale it down. You're talking about shopping. Let's talk about the holiday season. You want to go and buy some gifts for your family, but you want to get them on sale because you only have this much in your budget. So we did finance. So it was all about practical application. When are we going to be using this math in our real lives? Right now, right here. Let's practice it in this classroom so that you don't feel like what you're learning is for naught.
I guess like if you're looking at ratios and proportions, right? Do you
Mhm.
go from ratios and portions to making a cake, or do you go, all right, I'm doing this thing where maybe I'm putting a chair together, and you maybe get an idea like, oh, I could probably use this for this lesson because these things apply. Like, does the real world stuff happen first that leads to lessons, or is the lessons happen first that lead to the real world
It's
stuff?
both. It's both. I'm so glad you said that
Okay.
because I've been out of the classroom for a couple of years now. And when I look at license plates, when I'm at the gas station, I'm seeing these prices. I'm always thinking about the lessons that would
Yes.
apply. And I would encourage all of your listeners to do the same, right? Like, think outside of your curriculum because your
Hmm.
students, you mentioned engagement before we started recording, right? When you think about student engagement, the engagement comes from them being able to connect what you're teaching to their lived experience. And so if it excites you, if you're watching a movie or you're reading a book or something crosses your path as you're out and about in the world, if it excites you, it's going to excite them. And if it excites
Yes.
you, then when you get into the classroom, the energy that you bring to the presentation of this thing that you want to show your students, that's your kids are going to feed off of that. And that a lot of where the engagement comes from. It's like you're excited, so they're also going to be excited. You found a real world connection, so they'll also, latch onto that real world connection and see the practicality and just the general interest of what it is you're presenting to them that's tied to your content area. So this is sciences, the maths, the language arts, you name it. It all fits into our lived experiences. So seek those no, you don't have to seek them. Just be open to those opportunities in your own everyday experiences because when you bring those to the classroom, it does have the effect of transforming the teaching and learning experience.
Yes, I agree. So one of my biggest projects, the Build Your School project, is one of
Build your
the
school.
I think it's one of the projects that I'm most proud of. There we go.
Mm, there you
Uh,
go.
because so I was just on YouTube, like a lot of us are, and this
Yep.
video came up. It was almost 30 minutes long, but it was like schools all around the world. And I thought, a lot of times kids want to complain about school. So I go,
Mhm.
all right, well, if you could make school your own way, what would that look like? And so I give them um, different points that they have to hit, curriculum, extracurricular activities, uniforms, all of this different stuff for a structure. But from there, they can just kind of run with it. And it just came from me watching this video. And I show them the same video just so
That's
they
right.
can know where I'm coming from. So
Yes.
definitely our lived experiences and the things that we do every day, hopefully are sparking ideas in our own minds for how we can then teach these things with our curriculum to the students, right? And so when those things go hand in hand, I think we make the biggest difference. So
Amen. That's right.
speaking of how we build curriculum, do you have some key principles or philosophical foundation points that you stick to as you start to build and as you start to teach people how to build curriculum?
Yes, yes, I do. I do also want to emphasize a point that you just made. The things that are
Mhm.
inspiring us in our lived experience, right? Bring that to your classroom. So, like how you show your students that video. If it's a gas price, you take a picture of it. If you're in the supermarket and you're seeing different sales and you're trying to compare, is this the better buy or something else or whatever it is? Bring that into the classroom as that artifact that you're connecting what the
Mhm.
students are learning to the lived experience. So I just wanted to highlight and emphasize that point. And then, yes, so when it comes to planning curriculum, I always start with the grade level learning standards. I think that's really
Mm.
important. I need to make sure that I understand them. And so I will literally, if I'm switching grades, I will literally spend, a half a day just reading the standards and looking for those verbs, right? Like, students, what is it? What are the to-dos that students are needing to do with this standard? I typically look at the student book first, and then I'll look at the teacher's manual because the teacher's manual can be very dense and not very user friendly, but it's a resource. And then when it comes to planning units and lessons, I always only use the student book and I do the work first. So I only try to plan out maybe a couple of weeks in advance because things are subject to change. But
Mhm.
when it comes to doing the work, I do the work 2 or 3 days at a time, right? So I can see where the lesson is going. From there, I use that lesson that the student work that I just completed. And now I'm trying to figure, okay, what are the real world connections? And usually once I ask that question, to myself, before that lesson comes up, there'll be things that happen in my everyday experience that I will use to enhance the lesson. So I also
Mhm.
appreciate how you said your lived experiences, you're going to use them along with your curriculum. You're not supplementing, you're not throwing out the curriculum and saying what I want to teach is better. Sometimes it is, but I'm not promoting that because we're not curriculum developers. There are some people out here who are writing their
Not all of
own
us, some of us.
in air quotes curriculum, but you're not really writing curriculum because the connections that these curriculum developers are making between the grade level standards, which is where a lot of us go wrong when we're writing our own curriculum. We might be watering down the challenge, right?
Mm.
Because the way we're thinking about the lesson or thinking about how to teach the lesson is not on grade level. Sometimes what we're putting in front of our students is actually more challenging, or it misses some really important standards that students should be working towards. So you don't want to water things down, but you also don't want to skip anything that students need to be working on and developing at their grade level. So, because we're not curriculum developers, I absolutely believe in using a curriculum, right? And those are the steps that I would go through. And I'm a big proponent of enhancing or supplementing, the curriculum with more real world enhancements that students can connect to, you're connecting to, and help students to apply what they're learning in class to their real world experiences.
So, is there a structure or an outline that you have for your projects? And do you teach pretty much everything through projects? Because that's how I do it.
Okay. So no, as a math teacher, I do not teach everything through projects, but
Mhm.
I do try to have a mini project within each unit. All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is even there I go. Even if it's not a project that I'm teaching, I teach in 2 week cycles, right? And
Mm.
so what I'm doing there is I have my formative assessments, right, for those 2 weeks. And then by the end of that second week is where I'm doing my formative assessment. I'm having a quiz, or maybe it's a project presentation, or students had a written reflection to give me on the topic. But I do teach in 2 week cycles. And then there's one thing that I left out of my curriculum planning structure, and that was assessments. So I
Yes.
do study the grade level standards. And then the second thing I look at are the assessments that students are going to have to take that year, right? So yes, the end of the year assessment, which is typically a standardized test, but also in some school districts have interim assessments. So you might have one each quarter, or you might have one with each unit. I also try to take those because I need to know what is the level of rigor that my students are going to be assessed at. I need to always have that in the front and the back of my mind so that when I'm
Mhm.
teaching a unit, I'm sometimes using those released items from standardized tests as part of my assessments for students. If there's any kind of written component to an assessment, I'm gonna, try to recreate that for my students. And this is
Mhm.
not me teaching to the test. This is me assessing, number one, my proficiency at preparing my students, but also assessing that they are going to, that they're up to snuff, right? That they are learning the grade level, but they're learning at the grade level that they need to be learning, and that they're going to be ready for these assessments. So I think that that's also a really important component of your curriculum planning this summer and throughout the year, is to make sure you're taking those assessments so that you're not surprised about the level of rigor that students are going to be assessed at. And then just one little asterisk, I know in some districts, the assessments that are available are quote unquote trash. Be open-minded, right? Be open-minded. Find something that's at the level that your students need to be prepared for, and get it in front of your students. And if you're the only one creating the assessment, then that's not a true assessment, because you want to make sure that it's new and novel, right? You want to make sure that your students can do things that you have not created for them. That will be the truest assessment as to whether or not they're prepared.
So how do you
I hope I answered your
assess?
question.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Okay.
How do you address resistance? So this is you putting on your teacher hat for other teachers.
Okay.
How do you address resistance from teachers who are used to doing it the traditional way, and kind of
Yeah.
helping them to move along into, I don't know, updating their practices and becoming more malleable?
Yes. I'm just going to put it out there just in case you decide you want to reach out to me. I am a warm
Hey.
demander. Heavy emphasis on the demanding part, but I'm warm about it because I get it, right? I was in your shoes not long ago where it was like, number one, I remember when I first came into teaching, I thought the curriculum was trash, and that the curriculum developers, who were typically didn't look anything like the students that I taught, had no idea what they were doing, right? Like, my kids can't do this work. That's how I started off teaching. My students can't. These curriculum developers do not know my students. This work is too hard, so on and so forth. So I know, I get it. I also transitioned from being a traditional teacher. I do, we do, you do, right? That wasn't working. And so I empathize with the teachers that I'm working with, and I make it very clear that I get it. I get why, you're teaching the way you were taught. You're teaching in a way that, at least if your administrator comes in to observe you, they can at least say that, you were the sage on the stage, you presented something, you looked prepared.
It
And
looked
typically
the part.
it looked the part, right? Everybody's playing their role. You're teaching and your students look like they're listening and paying attention. But the fact of the matter is, if we just look at the historical data for public education across the nation, we know that teaching and learning are not happening, right? We know that it's not working, that we can be doing a better job. And in one of my blogs that I wrote recently, it's not the students. It's not our students that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's us who are in front of our students, who are not doing the best that we can do. And I know it's hard, right? I know it's hard. And so that's the role that I play. It's like, I get it. I get that change is hard. I get that, sometimes people are afraid to change because they're like, listen, if I start doing things too radically different, then my administrator or even myself, I will blame this new and novel thing that I'm doing as to why, students are not achieving. But that's just fear talking, right? That's just fear talking. You want to do it differently because what you're doing is not working. And if it is working, it's working for a segment of the population, but not for everybody. So where's the equity in that? It's not working for everyone. We know our historically marginalized and undereducated students are historically underserved and being undereducated, right? This is, we're going on Brown versus Board of Education, The Nation at Risk, all of these documents, all of these written articles and books and research, and these research papers, they're out there, and they've said over and again that we are not doing the best that we can do. And so for the teachers who are resistant, I get it. And also, we can do better. And so that's what I do. But the biggest thing I think I also do is I roll up my sleeves and I get in there with them. Right? It's like, I'm not going to just tell you, this is how you should be doing it. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to show you. So I remember this one teacher, and I hope she listens to this at some point. I definitely am going to share it with her, this podcast. But I remember going in and helping her revamp how she was assessing students, because she wasn't at first, right? She was like, I have 100 students. How am I going to give an exit ticket every day for 100 students? or her exit tickets for like 7 and 10 questions. And I'm like, you only need 1 or 2 questions for your exit ticket, right? Because either they got it or they don't got it. So what is the 1 or 2 questions that you can ask to assess whether or not your students have met the learning objective? And then you take this pile of papers, and then either they got it or they don't got it. And you use that data to figure out what you're going to do next. But if you're not collecting data at the end of your lessons, what information are you using to inform the next day's lesson? Are you just trudging through? Because that's what we do traditionally. Traditionally, it says, today is such and such a date. I'm supposed to be on lesson such and such, and tomorrow I'm supposed to be on the next lesson. So are we just trudging through, or are we actually teaching so that our students can learn? And these are the conversations that I have with my teachers I'm working with.
So once you get in there and you start working with them, I know that this will always come up is I don't feel supported, or I don't have what I need, or this is too much time, and burnout, which is why we're here to help teachers get through that part. So
Yes,
how
sir.
do you help to support them and kind of help them to figure out, like, because burnout is more personal than professional. I feel like
That's right.
we all have issues at our jobs, no matter if you are a teacher, if you're a welder, if you are a financial analyst. Okay, everybody has issues that they have to deal with. So it's not just teachers that have this trouble navigating the hard things at work. Okay, so let's just get that out the window, because
That's right.
that's my own soapbox that I could jump on, because I've worked other
Listen,
jobs. So
listen.
I digress. How do you help teachers figure out the being overwhelmed, the burnout part of doing this curriculum thing and putting together meaningful learning experiences for kids?
Amen. So they're doing too much. Classroom teachers are doing too much. When you step into that classroom, that is not your time. Your time is outside the classroom. Preparing the lesson is where you should be, busting your butt. Whether that's on the weekend or after school, it's in preparing the lesson. Once you go into the classroom, you become the facilitator. So you're at your desk, you're circulating around and getting in your steps. You're making sure students are on task and on topic, but you are not at the front of the classroom teaching. And because you have invested so much time preparing the lesson where your students are doing the heavy lifting, right? Then you already have prepared for them to be engaged, because you've already made those lived experience connections, right? So you know that what you're putting in front of your students, they're going to want to engage with, because you've done that work. When you're in the classroom, you should not be working. That's when your students should be working. Think 80-20, right? The 80-20 rule. Inside the classroom, students should be doing 80% of the work. You should be doing 20%. Outside of the classroom, you're doing the 80% of the work. You're working too hard. I believe classroom teachers are working way too hard. Be a facilitator. Facilitate the classroom learning experience.
I love it. Before we get out of here,
Yes.
what I would say trends or innovations do you feel like are coming, whether in the near or distant future, that will help teachers to be able to figure these things out, or just kind of make our jobs easier or more relevant
Mm,
or more useful? What are some things that are coming down the pike that you feel like will be very useful for all of us?
yeah, I think AI.
Oh
I
yeah.
think, yeah, using AI to enhance your lessons, right? Like sometimes I remember when I was, doing this initially, it was about, going into YouTube and going down the internet rabbit hole and literally
Mhm.
spending hours trying to figure out how to enhance my lesson, right? Number one, I had to learn the topic, because a lot of the math that I thought I knew from being in school, I didn't really understand until I became a teacher, right? So there was a lot of learning I had to do to understand ratios. What is it to compare part to part compared to part to whole, right? Those were things that were just mind-boggling that I had to learn. So yeah, you're going to spend some time on the internet doing research to make sure that you really understand the topic before you present it to your students. But then you can use Chat GPT or whatever the other AI platforms are out there, to figure out how to enhance your lesson, right? So you can put in those questions just like you're talking to a real person. How do I enhance the 7th grade math lesson? Plug in the standard, with a trendy topic that students will find engaging, right? Like you can literally put that into these AI platforms to give you some ideas on how to enhance your lesson. And once you do it a couple of times and you're like, oh, that's how I enhance the lesson. Now you have something that you can rinse and repeat, right? You can apply that to the next unit, to next year, to what have you. But you want to get some ideas. I think AI is a great place that classroom teachers can start to utilize to save them lots and lots of time in curriculum planning.
Okay, advice. What advice would you give someone who wants to, step one, I need to redo my curriculum. I need to redo how I'm teaching. I need to rethink, transform, if you will. What is
Mhm.
step one for that person?
Step one, even though I have 3,
To call you first.
I guess that would yeah, start with Dr. O, right? Reach out to me, the Academy of Practical Application. I'm on the
You can give your
internet
3 steps.
at apa-education.org, because my 3 steps are, if you're going to revamp your curriculum, you really do have to understand the 1, grade level standards, 2, the grade level assessments that your students are going to be taking, and 3, what the curriculum has provided for you. And you have to do these 3 things before you can start thinking about transforming and enhancing the curriculum to make it more engaging for your students. Because step 4 is not actually revamping the curriculum. Step 4 is learning your students. So when the school year starts, the 4th step is for you to get to know your students quickly, not just their names, their personalities, what they do after school, what they're interested in, what they're wearing on their feet, right? Like what's their fashion sense? How do they wear their hair? Are they early to school, late to school? Who are their friends? You want to get to know them, because that's the most organic way to enhance your units and your daily lessons, right? When you start thinking about the project, you don't want to think of a project that's applicable to sports if the majority of your students are into music, right? So you really want to the 4th step is getting to know your students quickly at the start of the school year. If you want to transform how you teach, your curriculum, your pedagogy, there are 4 steps.
Dr. O, thank you so
Yes.
much. I'm sure we could go for another hour, but our
Yes, we
time
could.
has come.
Aw. Wah, wah.
I hope you all enjoyed that conversation between me and Dr. O. It is always, always, always a pleasure having her on. I mean, she just oozes personality in education. So I'm definitely going to have her on again. What we will talk about, I am not 100% sure, but I know it's going to be good. Of course, before we get out of here, remember, it's important to understand the grade level standards assessments and provided curriculum to be able to create a solid foundation for lesson planning. Also, understand the value of connecting lessons to students' interests and lived experiences to enhance engagement and retention. And lastly, explore strategies to shift from traditional teacher, sage on the stage methods to a facilitation approach, allowing students to take a more active role in their learning. We're not saying that there's not a time to be in the front lecturing, giving the information, but there should be a more active approach from the students, because the people who do learn. Because you enjoyed what you heard from this episode so much, go join the Teacher Triumphs Facebook group. Me and Jen created it as a way to help you overcome burnout and balance life by building community with other wonderful educators. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next Monday and Thursday with more Teacher Tales. Keep teaching, keep learning, and I will see you all on the next journey.